Go.
Good evening. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan and everyone at Books and Books, I would like to welcome you to tonight's program. It is my pleasure to introduce Books and Books guest author and moderator this evening. As a young economist at an international consulting firm, John Perkins traveled the world working in numerous less commercially advanced countries. His experiences led to a metamorphosis in thinking about what is best for all the people throughout this planet. Tonight, John Perkins will be speaking about touching the Jaguar, which I believe I first read one of his earlier books, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, when it spent 73 weeks on the New York Times bestsellers list. What I learned then and experienced as soon as I began touching the Jaguar is that Mr. Perkins is an engaging writer who makes you feel as though you are with him every step of the way, even when he is walking across a floor of cockroaches in the middle of an unlit night. His newest book, about which we will now hear, is best described by its subtitle, Transforming Fear into Action to Change Your Life and the World. Tonight's moderator is Thom Hartmann, best known for his national radio show, The Thom Hartmann Program. He has been named the most popular liberal talk show host in America. Michael Harrison, the publisher of the radio industry trade magazine Talkers, has said this about Mr. Hartmann. He's an original thinker. He's the kind of host that other people can get their talking points from. We are so delighted to have both of you with us this evening. Before I turn the screen over to our guests, I'd like to remind you that you can purchase Touching the Jaguar by hitting button independently owned bookstore, Books and Books. Also, by using the Ask a Question button on the bottom of the screen. Without further ado, I give you John Perkins and Thom Hartmann.
Thank you. I'm not sure where the feedback is coming from. Is that just on my computer or is that everybody's?
I'm hearing it also, Tom. Now it's stopped.
Okay.
Well, come back again.
That's very strange. I'll try to, in case it's coming out of here, I'm going to try putting a pair of earbuds in and seeing if that solves the problem. I'm not used to this.
There. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Apparently it was picking up my own mic and there's
You're still
echo. Yeah.
Am I echoing also when I speak?
I'm not hearing that.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll talk very little, and John, you can talk a whole lot. John, it's great to see you. We've been friends for years. You've done some great work, both in the area of personal development, metaphysics, and business, and government, and all kinds of stuff that we've talked about over the years. Tell us about the Jaguar.
Well, Tom, thank you. Yeah, it's great to see you. It's great to be with you again. It's been a while, but I enjoy your work so much. I'm very honored to be here with you and to be at Books and Books again. I spent many wonderful times in person at their stores around in the Miami area, but it's a little different this time. It's still great to be here. So the Jaguar, I was a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon rainforest in 1969, and I was dying. I got very, very ill at one point. I was living with the Schwab people who were hunters and gatherers, and I couldn't keep any food down. I couldn't get to a medical facility because it would have taken about 3 days of very difficult hiking through jungle and an awful bus ride up through the mountains. And anyway, I couldn't do it. I couldn't even stand up on my own. So this one night, this shaman offered to heal me. And I graduated from business school. I had no idea what a shaman was. I never even heard of a shaman. But that night, he took me on this shamanic journey, what we might call a vision quest. And while I was in this vision quest, I saw this amorphous form out in front of me, and the shaman shouts to me, "Touch the jaguar." And I was terrified. I'm in the middle of the jungle. It's night. I look all around like, where's the jaguar? And he says, no, close your eyes and see that jaguar and touch it. So I did. And the amorphous form shapeshifted into a jaguar. Kind of like this one. I'm like, sure. And I heard this voice, like my mother's voice, and it said something like, food and drink will kill you, son. And at that moment, I realized that, I'm eating food like squirming white live grubs. It seemed very, very strange to me. I've never had anything like this before. And the people in the Amazon don't drink water from the rivers because they know the rivers are dangerous. There's organic matter in them. And so the women make a kind of beer by chewing and spitting manioc root. It's called chicha. And it sets up a fermentation process that then you can add water to. And so every time I'm drinking this spit beer or eating these strange foods, I can hear the voice saying,
John, I don't know what's causing that. I don't see it. On the assumption that maybe my microphone has something to do with this. Although I don't have a hot mic on, I've been trying to figure out how to mute my mic on here. I don't know if I just was.
I don't see a way to mute either.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'll continue. So, So when I touched the jaguar, I heard this voice saying it'll kill you. At the same time, I saw how incredibly healthy the Shuar are. Oh, the echo seems to have stopped now for whatever reason. And they're very robust, very vital people. They're hunters and gatherers, and they live to be very old if they don't die from a hunting accident or something like that. And so that night, I understood that it wasn't the food and drink killing me, it was my perception. And I got healthy after that. And the shaman then required that I become his apprentice. We're in an economy, and we're in a culture that has no currency. There was no way I could pay him in money because it was a barter economy. So he asked me to be his apprentice. And as I said, I graduated from business school. In those days, there was no future. There was no future in shamanism, Tom. But he saved my life. So I studied with him. And that's when he said to me, touching the jaguar means that you identify your fears, your barriers, what's holding you back from doing what you want to do with your life. You identify those. You, instead of running from them, instead of ignoring them, you touch them. And when you touch them, it changes your perception. You change your perception, and then you get the energy to change your actions. And our perceptions change our reality. When we change our perceptions, we, in essence, change our reality. It was an amazing teaching. And, later on, I would understand that shamans around the world teach this. I studied with shamans in many other countries, and it's also the basis for modern psychotherapy, for marketing, for quantum physics. The idea that there's no United States, there's no Russia, there's no culture, there's no religion except as we perceive them. And when enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, it has a huge impact on reality. And so that was where this idea of touching the jaguar, which means that we. When we want to do something, we should do something. There may be voices telling us that we can't do it this way. It's making us sick. We're not educated enough, whatever. When we touch those voices, when we touch those obstacles, we get the energy to move forward and create change.
Extraordinary experience, John. I had my mic muted. I figured it out, by the way. If you mouse up to the top of the screen, you get a little control panel popping up there. I don't know, maybe Karen can do that too. But For people who are not going to have, and which I think is pretty much all of us, given the coronavirus right now, but are not going to have an opportunity to go visit the Amazon or visit a shaman or have that experience. But actually, I have two questions. One, that's a very different culture, an ancient culture, almost a hunter-gatherer culture. We're in a quite different culture, and we have a different way of dealing with both spirituality and personal growth, for lack of a better phrase. So how do you make that transition, and how can the average person do that who doesn't have access to that kind of a teacher outside of, obviously reading your book?
Well, yeah, and really, Tom, that's part of why I wrote the book. So, the book touches upon a number of themes, but I think some of the major ones are, first, our reality is shaped by our perceptions. And the second one is that our perception of what it means to be successful in this world has created a pretty unviable situation, what we call a death economy, an economic system that in essence is destroying the world as we know it, consuming all the long resources in the short term to make short-term profits. And another theme is that we need to transform that death economy into a life economy, an economic system that will serve us in the future. We can go into this in more detail if you like, but another theme that we all have a role to play in this, and every one of us has the ability to work toward this changing of perception. So if we want to transform it, this current economic system, a death economy that's consuming itself into extinction, into a life economy, which is regenerative, which cleans up pollution, pays people to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to recycle, to create new regenerative technologies. All we have to do, it's quite simple, is change the perception of what it means to be successful, to go from the current idea that corporations have a goal of maximizing short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. And all of us as individuals should have the goal of maximizing our short-term consumer desires. And we change that perception to that we all need to maximize, and corporations need to maximize, long-term benefits for all people and nature. And when we make that transition, of the perception, we open the door to transition into reality. Then, of course, there's work to be done. I say it's simple. It's simple to understand that it requires a change in perception, but it also requires us to do some work around all of that. Unmute.
Let's start. Oh, jeez. I guess I need to go back to this.
Totally baffling. So, at the level of culture, at the level of society, at the level of policy, I suppose, for lack of a better word, where do we start? Is it just a matter of celebrating sustainability? I mean, we've been doing that for a while. Do you have any other thoughts, or expand those thoughts and suggestions? And then I want to get into the level of at the personal.
Sure. Incidentally, this amusing thought. It's the NSA is listening in here. The CIA. They're making this echo. They just don't want this conversation to happen. It's obviously a joke, but
Early
you're the most liberal progressive. You're the most popular progressive radio station out there. I'm writing these books about these subjects that are about changing the way that we do our economy. Who's trying to stop us here? So in the book is written as a narrative nonfiction, which means I tell a lot of stories, true stories because I love stories. I'm a storyteller. They're true. I hope they're fun to read, exciting, and so on. But in the end, it comes up to a process that every reader can go through for less than 10 minutes. And you can do it every day or once a week, whatever feels right. But it takes us all into what each one of us as an individual can do. And let me start by saying, all of us can be part of consumer movements that are pretty easy these days with social networking. So if every listener out there picks a corporation that you'd like to see changed, and you write an email or tweet or whatever to them, and you say, hey, I love your product, but I'm not going to buy it anymore until you pay your workers in Indonesia a fair salary, or clean up the pollution you've caused. And then you send that out to all your social networking circles and ask them to send it to the corporation and to all their social networking circles. These things have a lot of power. I've talked to a lot of chief executive officers who've said, you know, I want to do the right thing, but I know if I lose market share, I'll lose my job and be replaced by someone who only cares about market share. So I want to hear from my customers. I want to have 100,000 messages I can take to my main investors and say, these are our customers. We got to change. Beyond that, I think every one of us, you know, I don't know what every listener, what passions or skills that you all have, but I know you all have passions and skills. And so this process that's outlined in the book that you can do for a few minutes a day or whenever, it starts with asking ourselves 5 questions. And those questions are pretty basic. The first one is, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? What will bring me the greatest satisfaction, the greatest bliss? I would answer that question by saying, I want to write. I love to write. I love to write. And a friend of mine who's a carpenter says, well, I want to work with my hands and wood. That's quite different from a writer. So I want to use those 2 examples. But everybody can answer that question. What do I want to do for the rest of my life? And the second question is, how can I tie that in with helping other people? Because we all feel better when we help others. And that could be one other person or the whole world. So as a writer, I would answer that by saying, I like to tell stories that inspire people to change their lives and to change the world for that matter. And my carpenter friend would say, well, I want to use sustainable products. And the third question then is, what's stopping you? What's standing in your way? What are the barriers? What are the Jaguars standing out there that are stopping you? And I would answer perhaps, at the beginning at least, well, I don't have enough time to write. And my carpenter friend would say, well, my clients don't want to spend more money for sustainable products. They're just not willing to pay more. And then the fourth question is, when you touch that Jaguar, what is the change of perception? So for a writer, you might say, well, I could get up half an hour earlier every day, or I could watch an hour less of television every day, or maybe 3 days a week. I can create time to write. And my carpenter friend would say, the Jaguar tells him, look, go tell your clients, this isn't a cost. The added expense of sustainable products isn't a cost. It's an investment. You're investing in your own future and the future of your children and your grandchildren and so on and so forth. And then the fifth question is, what actions do I take every day? And for a writer, gotta write, you know. For my friend the carpenter, it's go out there and make cabinets, build houses using sustainable materials, and let his clients know. He doesn't have to be poetic. He doesn't have to write a book about it, but he can just say, hey, look, I built that cabinet. It's all sustainable products. Tell your kids that this is, you've just invested in their future by doing that. It's like paying for their education or something else. You've invested in the future. So we can all, Tom, whether you're a radio host like you, or a writer like me, or a carpenter, or a plumber, or a teacher, or a parent, whatever we are, we can all go through this process. And those last 3 questions, the answers will change. You know, what's blocking me? How do I change my perceptions, and what actions do I take? So once I've overcome this idea that I don't have enough time, I get up half an hour earlier, maybe I take an hour off at night. Then the next morning I get up and say, okay, I figured that one out, but now there's another Jaguar. What am I going to write about? You know, and then I say, well, what do I want to write about? Gee, I'd really like to write about the demonstrations that are going on around the world today about racial discrimination. And then the Jaguar says, yeah, but what do you know about that? And I say, well, maybe. So the answer is, well, I can do some research and I can write from my heart. So we go through this process. And every time we go through this process and we answer these questions and we take this practice, we rise to a higher level of consciousness individually. And we're really helping ourselves. We're becoming more satisfied with ourselves. And if we do that process where we're helping others, we are indeed helping others more and more and more. So it's a continual process that leads to greater joy in life, to greater happiness, and ultimately to creating a better world.
Cool. There we go. Somebody's doing it for me. Thank you. Well, I don't know why this is.
We just
Anyway.
like your voice, Tom. So we want to hear it 3 or 4 times.
So, John, where do you see our society at right now, and where do you see it going? What are the lessons that you learned from people in the Amazon that you think we should all be applying to our lives and to our society as a culture?
It's a great question, and you know, there's a couple of answers there. I'll answer the first one is the people in the Amazon. So when I first lived with them in the late 60s, early 70s, they were fighting amongst each other. The Shuar, the Achua, the Quechua. There were battles, and it was territorial because these were hunters and gatherers, and hunters and gatherers need a large territory. So they were defending their territories. They weren't really so much battles as skirmishes, but they were fighting with each other. They saw their neighbors as their enemies. And then about the time I got there in the late 60s, Texaco came in, the oil companies, foreign oil companies came in. And suddenly they saw the real enemy was these foreign companies that were destroying the rainforest for all of them. So they changed their perception of who the enemy was and who their allies were. And their former enemies, hundreds, maybe thousands of years of animosity, came together. And they formed alliances, federations, and they had intermarriage. They all came together. They had a huge change of perception that then changed their actions and changed their reality. And they went against the oil companies. And then not long after that, they understood that it really wasn't the oil companies and the mining companies. It was the dream of the world. They call the dream, which to them is the perception of the modern world that requires oil and requires mined minerals, our world. That was the real danger, that you can't just stop the oil companies as long as people want oil. And so that's when they came to me and asked me to form a partnership with the people they most feared, my people. That was their Jaguar. Let's form a partnership. And out of that came the Dream Change and the Pachamama Alliance that Bill and Lynn Twist and I formed together. And it's still going strong now in more than 80 countries, changing the dream of the world. That's our goal, as well as helping to finance lawyers and people in the Amazon to protect the immediate land, but also to realize that we've got to change the dream of the world. It was a great lesson in how these people who we thought of as primitive, illiterate, uneducated, but they had this deep understanding of touching the Jaguar, of going to that which they most feared, first their neighbors, and then us in the outside world, to know that that's how they have to change things. And I think, Tom, even before the coronavirus, even before this pandemic, there was a tremendous movement to change in our country. We had B corporations, benefit corporations, conscious capitalism, the Green New Deal. Last August, as you know, 192 of the world's most powerful, successful executives came together at the Business Roundtable and said, our goal can no longer be just maximizing short-term profits. They in essence said, we've got to have a goal of creating a life economy. And so we've seen this movement. We, the people, need to recognize that those executives, so they can't do that unless their customers, us, their employees, and their investors, us, really force them to do it. So, but we've seen this movement. It's a perceptual change that we're experiencing, that we've been experiencing. Really, it's a consciousness revolution. And it's everywhere. It's in China. I was recently in China teaching at an MBA program there, and it's in Russia. It's all over the world. There's this change in consciousness, and I think this coronavirus and now are waking up to the terrible discrimination that's been caused. I think is pushing us even further in that direction. Incidentally, a baby Jaguar just climbed up here to join me. She's actually just a cute. Yeah, she's a kitten from the United States, but she has the markings of a Jaguar. She's amazing. She's 8 weeks old, but
a tiger kitty. Just with regard to this echo that's going on, I just went to see if there were questions, and somebody said maybe Tom has another device on that's producing feedback. There's no other device on. And this was working just fine for the 10 minutes that we were all talking before we went live. So I'm wondering if the way it's been set up to go live or to record has some sort of something turned on that's feeding audio back into the stream somehow, because I just don't understand how this is happening. And it seems to be happening to both of us. And it was happening to Kara before. So maybe whoever's running this can just check your control console. John, I have, it has occurred to me more than once that the coronavirus, let me back up, that if Gaia, if the world is conscious, if all life collectively is conscious, and you know, James Lovelock's hypothesis in its extended form is true, and the planet is being battered by us and cooked by us, and life on Earth is being destroyed by us, and species are going extinct, and the biosphere is, you know, the hole in the ozone, it just goes on and on and on, that the planet as a living organism said, okay, I'm going to put a stop to this, or at least slow this damn train wreck down, and I'm going to throw this little tiny virus out there and cause these humans to shut down some of this stupid activity.
Yeah.
And the corona, you know, corona's a queen. I mean, this is like it's a crown, right? It would be like the queen of the earth, you know, the mother earth speaking to us. I'm curious, is that just too out there metaphysical, or, you know, what do you think?
I totally agree, and there's a cool story here. So there's a wonderful woman shaman up in the Andes, Quechua speaking woman, with a great name of Maria Juana, Maria Juana Yamberla. And I take groups there, you know, and I have one planned in August. It's not going to happen in August. It'll hopefully happen in January. People can go to johnperkins.org if you want to join one of these trips. But several years ago, I was there, and somebody in our group asked her, and I'm translating, so Maria Juana, how do we save the planet? How do we save the earth? And she laughs, and she says, well, you know, the earth's not in danger. We are. Species, and we can take other species with us, but we're like so many fleas, and if we get to be too much of a nuisance, Pachamama, Mother Earth, will just blah, 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 shake us all off. And she pointed up at this big volcano that hovers over her home, Imbabura, Sacred Mountain, and she said, a few years ago, that volcano was covered with a massive ice cap. It isn't anymore. Pachamama is twitching. She's sending us a message. And we're blessed to be able to hear the message. We can listen and change, and we better change. And you know, Tom, ever since then, whenever there's been a major hurricane or an earthquake or the fires in California or Australia, wherever, I thought about this. It's more of a twitch, but we've taken these things as local. So we've assumed that if I survive a hurricane, the outside world is going to come to help me in a few days or maybe a couple of weeks. I'm going to get bottled water and food, and then we're going to work hard to return to the old system that we had before. But this virus now is no longer local. It's global. Everybody on the planet, including people deep in the Amazon, are impacted by this virus. And so I think this is the next message from Gaia, from the living earth. And you know, you can look at it from a shamanic perspective, as I just explained, but from a scientific perspective, it's the same. You know, we know that suddenly people can see the stars in places where they never could see stars before, like Beijing and sometimes Los Angeles. We know that, you know, this virus, the shutdown of our economy, has helped us really see how differently we can do things. I didn't fly to Miami to be in this bookstore today, and we're probably reaching more people this way in many different parts of the world than if I'd flown to Miami and was standing in front of the bookstore right now. And we're learning so much about how we can move into a life economy. I think we're being forced to learn that Pachamama is really twitching hard now, and I think more and more people are listening, and I certainly hope so.
How do you explain that to someone who grew up in Western culture, who grew up in the Judeo-Christian or Islamic tradition, who views the world through the lens of monotheism and science?
Well, that's me, Tom. I grew up in that world. I was christened when I was less than a year old in a Christian church. I went to a boys' school where my dad taught. That was a Methodist school. You know, I went to a business school. I have a science degree. I have a Bachelor of Science, and that was me. And it still is to a certain degree. I still think that there's a tremendous amount of scientific proof that we've got to change. There's no question about it. You know, we all know that picture of the polar bear out there in that ice cap, and we all know that the glaciers are melting and the oceans are rising and species are going extinct, and there's terrible income inequality around the world, and the forests are dissipating, are being torn down. We know this, and we all know it. And the question is, how do we help ourselves to understand that there's a new perception and a new way of facing reality? And I think, you know, this idea of touching the Jaguar, transforming fear into action to change your life in the world. The fear is almost always fear of change. And we humans don't like change. And so there's been this fear, well, wait, if we got to go from this economic system to something else, well, what's that going to do for my income? Am I going to be able to fly to Ecuador anymore? What's this going to do? How's this going to impact me? And I think the coronavirus has taught us that we've all had to change a lot. And it hasn't been all that bad. I mean, people get sick of it after a while. But I know so many people who've said, you know, I always wanted to learn the flute and I never took the time to do it, but I have during these last few months. You know, I have a flute and I can go online and learn to play it. Or I wanted to read these books and I finally had time to do it. So we have learned about change, and you and I right now are participating in this radical change of how we come together, and we understand that it's not a bad thing to have an echo. So we can get, you know, we've got some technical problems, but those are sort of minor. We might have those if we were in person too. Sometimes microphones go haywire when you're in person too. But we've really learned that we can live with change, and I think this has been an incredibly important learning. And at the same time, we've had this awakening to the terrible racial discrimination that's going on. I mean, people really, really are waking up to this, and that's all part of this death economy too. Every major crisis we are facing the root cause is this death economy, and so these other things, climate change, racial discrimination, all these things, they're terrible problems, but they're also symptoms of a bigger problem, which is this overall system that's failing us.
There's been a critique of our economic system that goes back a long, long ways. Adam Smith's, what was the title of his book? Not Wealth of Nations, but a theory of moral sentiments. Yeah. And in that book, he basically was critiquing the capitalism that he was somewhat promoting in Wealth of Nations. I mean, most people don't realize when he talked about the invisible hand, it was a warning, not praise. But there's, you know, and then of course Marx came along in the 1850s, 60s and started critiquing capitalism in a big way, and that has led to some changes. And now we've got folks who are suggesting that really we should just like restart capital, or set aside capitalism. Like, our publisher Barrett Kohler is a B corporation, a beneficient or beneficial corporation. And instead what we should do is moving toward a system where every company is basically owned by the people who work for it. Louise and I wrote a book called Threshold, The Crisis of Western Culture, and we spent quite a bit of time in Spain, in Mondragon, one of the largest co-ops in the world. We met with them. We met with their CEOs. I think it's maybe the last chapter or the next to the last chapter of that book. And we went up to Wisconsin and met with Union Cab Company and Peninsula Manufacturing companies that are literally employee owned. You talk about the horrors of this economy and what it's done to us all, and it's very, very real. Do you have specific thoughts? I mean, I just laid out a few. I'm not sure that Marx's critique, I think his analysis and his suggestions, actually, his analysis is spot on. I think his suggestions work in small communities. I mean, that's the essence of a kibbutz. It's the essence of a tribal economy. But it seems that when a society gets large enough for people to behave, particularly sociopaths, to behave anonymously, that system of, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs or her needs, that kind of starts to break down. What are your thoughts on how we should go about reinventing our economy?
Well, yeah, I think the idea of employee-owned businesses is a great one. I love that idea, and I think we have to be very careful to understand that the real issue here is the goal. And as long as you have a goal, which was really promoted, where it really took off big time was 1976 after Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he made the statement, the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term stockholder profits.
Right.
And he said, if we do that, it'll take care of all the environmental and social issues. That's just BS. It hasn't worked. If you have that goal, regardless of who owns the companies, we're going to end up having problems. There's just no question. That's just a lousy goal, maximizing short-term profits, because that gives whoever runs the company, whether it's the employees or some, Dr. No type of person, that gives whoever's running the company the right, even the mandate to do whatever it takes to maximize short-term profits, including destroying the planet, if that's what it takes, destroying the resources upon which the long-term depends, and corrupting politicians, which now is done legally by, making huge campaign financing contributions. So I think I think all of those issues are important ones, and we need to look at that micro side of it. But to me, the most important one is to change the perception of what it means to be successful as a business and as individuals. That it should no longer be about the short term, that we need to focus on going toward this life economy, which is a long-term renewable resource.
But we structure principally economic incentives into these things. I mean, it was in 1976 that the Supreme Court, for the first time in the history of the United States, said that if a billionaire wants to own a politician and give them money and tell them what to do, and they do what the billionaire wants, that's no longer called corruption. It's no longer called bribery. It's now called First Amendment free speech. And then 2 years later, in the Bellotti decision, they applied that logic to corporations. And of course, Citizens United came out of those. It was in 1983 that Ronald Reagan had the SEC change the rules on stockholder compensation to executives. Prior to that, CEOs could not be compensated with stock. It was a crime. It was against the law. So they could buy stock, but they didn't, on the open market. But it wasn't part of their pay, and so they weren't quite as incentivized to just do the short-term stuff. And in fact, in 1980, when Reagan came to office, of the Fortune 500 companies, over 400 of them had CEOs who had literally started at the bottom of their companies, and the average tenure of a CEO in America was 23 years in the same company. All that got blown to hell in the 80s when Reagan changed that one little rule that CEOs could be compensated with stock. And suddenly you've got, the CEO of United Healthcare, Dollar Bill McGuire, back in the 90s, took $1.6 billion out of that company. And an awful lot of that came from saying, no, you can't have that operation, little kid. So, I mean, there's like these kind of, what would you call them, trim tabs, these little things that you can tweak a little bit, and it produces this huge change. So, for example, destroying the planet, people are talking about a carbon tax. If we had to pay to pollute the planet, we might do less of it. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about, or is there something larger or something that I'm missing?
No, that's absolutely it. That we've got to redefine what it means to be successful. When Time starts putting the person of the year on the cover of their end of the year magazine, and that person is Tom Hartman, or an executive that's pushing for somebody that's really pushing for perception change, an executive who's taking his company down that route. And we've seen this increasingly. 20 years ago, you couldn't buy organic food anywhere, I don't think, or maybe, in a small local market and out in a rural area, you could. Now it's in every place. Walmart has it. Everybody has it. 10 years ago, who would have thought there would be we would have made the progress we have over transgender and all the other gender issues that we've made progress over. We've made tremendous strides, and sometimes we forget. It seems like 10 years is a long time, but it's really just a blink in history. And so, yeah, all of these things. And I would say I went to business school before 1976, before Milton Friedman, before the laws that you're talking about, before Reagan. I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, decent rate of return.
Oh, the average was 30 to 1 in 1980.
Yeah, yeah. And
now it's 500 to 1.
Well, exactly. And when I was in business school, it was even less than 30 to 1. And you know, you bought blue chip stocks, which were stocks that meant that you'd get about 2% or maybe 3% above inflation for the rest of your life. And that was a good deal. You weren't looking for these windfall profits. And I was also taught that a good CEO takes good care of his employees, gives them health care insurance and pension funds, and takes care of the communities where the business works. So not only pays taxes, but also imagine that, pay taxes, but also puts money into recreational facilities or healthcare systems or schools. And we were taught that you've got to be a good citizen. And then all that changed. And really, I think Friedman is the turning point. That von Hayek won the Nobel Prize a couple of years before that. He said something similar. But Friedman had the ear of Reagan and Thatcher and many people and all over the world. He was advising governments in Chile and everywhere. And so we saw this radical change. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. So today we've got in the United States 3 individuals who have as much wealth as half the population of this country, and it's we've really gone into this horrible place. But we're now seeing the shadow side. I think part of what's happened with this coronavirus and what's even before then, when B corporations were coming, a shadow was beginning to show. And right now, in a way, it's almost a classic conflict between how do we get over this virus long term versus the short term desire to make profits, to get back to work, to get the economy moving again. There's a clash right now going on. It's going on in Congress. It's going on in local communities. It's going on, whatever city you live in, it's probably going on. This idea, how do we reconcile that? And unfortunately, I think too often the idea of short-term profits is winning out. But at the same time, we have seen a movement, a consciousness arising around the globe that things are not working and that we need to change. And I keep writing books and talking on programs like this because I really believe that we are on the cusp of major change. It's a consciousness revolution. But as you know, Tom, whenever there's a revolution, there are those who push back. The status quo tries to stop it. That's always the case, whether it's a physical revolution like the American Revolution or the Age of Enlightenment or whatever it is. And so right now we're getting that pushback. We're getting, a lot of the politicians around the world and corporate people to push back and say, no, we can't change. We got to get back to normal. We got to be better than ever. We got to go back to the same normal and do it twice as well as we ever have before. Whereas in fact, we all, I think, in our hearts know we really need to create a new normal, and that's the life economy.
Yeah, amen. I think that many people looking at these times are frightened. I mean, I think that it's obvious, and there's a pretty good sized body of literature about resilience. The Kauai study in the 1950s and 60s on children of great poverty. Marty Seligman's work. I mean, there's just some brilliant stuff out there. And one of the things that we learn is that we develop resilience as a result of being challenged. That even people who are challenged by terrible things in their childhood, sometimes they end up more fragile, but actually slightly more frequently they end up more resilient. Not that anybody would wish that on anybody, but can you speak to that issue of resilience, individual resilience, how we deal with adversity, how we deal with being locked in our homes, how we deal with the loss of jobs, how do we deal with loss of family, how do we deal with what seems to be a political and cultural meltdown that's happening all around us right now?
Yeah. Well, I think these times push us into examining new ways of doing things and looking at things, new perceptions. I mean, I was faced with death in the Amazon. That was the first really, really tough, terrifying experience I had, but it pushed me to a new realization of how important my perceptions were and how I could change my reality through changing perceptions, which has impacted me ever since. And at this point, we are. Well, no, let me go back a bit and say, I think we can say that most of a lot of the great inventions, whether they're technical inventions or whether they're things in art, music, and so forth, so much of that has come out of adversity, out of wars, out of struggle, out of oppression, a lot of brilliant things, which is perhaps unfortunate. And I hope that what we're seeing now, we're all going through adversity right now. There's no question that this is a tough time. This pandemic is reminiscent of the Black Plague in some respects, Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we're learning. We are being resilient. We are learning. So many countries around the world have done a very good job at handling this. I don't think the United States has done such a good job, and I'm sorry about that. But that's partly because we've focused on the short-term economics, that we got to get people back to work, we got to get people back in the restaurants and so forth. And I understand where that's coming from. I understand people that they don't want to lose their businesses. That's very real. So in any case, I think that this in the short long run, let's say over the next year or two, I believe that we will look at this time as an opportunity to really understand how we need to change. We're right in it now. We're in the trenches. So we're struggling to survive and move through it. Once we get out of the trenches and we can kind of look back at what this was all about, my hope is that we will be really coming to this enlightened, maybe enlightened is too big a word, but we'll come to a new perception of what it means to be successful and how we move forward. Here's an example. We spend on our military budget more than the next 10 countries combined. Over $50 of every dollar American taxpayers, of every $100 that every $50 out of every 100 that every taxpayer pays in the United States goes to the military. And a lot of it's to very archaic equipment. Who needs more and more aircraft carriers and missiles and tanks at a time when cybersecurity is really the big issue? And when the real enemy right now is a tiny virus that we can't even see. So what if we put much larger share of that budget to creating better medical systems, better technology, to cleaning up pollution, to really moving forward with the life economy? And my hope is that this time that we're going through now will help more and more of us see this. That's when, I wrote the book before I knew the virus was coming, but I knew there were all these other events, once in 100-year events that were happening every day or so that were pushing us toward change. And so I think that, the timing of this book is perfect from that standpoint, as far as I'm concerned. It's not so great in that the bookstores aren't doing so well, and I feel badly for them, but it's a great time to really confront our fears, to touch our jaguars, to confront our fears, and to take the actions that are necessary to change our lives and the world.
Yeah, and we're talking with John Perkins about his new book. John, could you just recap real quickly? We've been talking for 45 minutes, and the first part of this was kind of garbled. And my apologies for any role I may have played in that. And just recap what touching the Jaguar means.
Yeah. So let me just. I love the cover, so I want to show it here again. But I love the subtitle too. Transforming fear into action to change your life and the world. And it really is about whenever we. So if we identify what do we most want to do with our lives, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? On that proverbial deathbed, what are you going to look back and be proudest of, or what are you going to wish you'd done more of? Well, do it. Well, what's holding you back? There's a barrier. There's a Jaguar. Saying you can't do it. Somebody's told you you're not educated enough. You're not cute enough. You're not the right. You don't come from the right part of culture. Whatever it is, there's something holding you back, and it may even be a physical thing. But when we go out and we touch that Jaguar, we say, wait a minute, that's just not true. I had an English teacher who I had a lot of respect for in college who didn't like my writing. And I dropped out of college because of it, because I wanted to write, and I believed him that I was a lousy writer. And later on, and I was a big Jaguar. Later on, it occurred to me, wait a minute, that English teacher didn't like he didn't like the writing of some really famous writers too, and so who was he? He was just an individual with an opinion. I don't have to listen to his opinion. In fact, he didn't like Bob Dylan's writing, my English teacher. Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize in Literature. So it's a big Jaguar. Like, oh, wait a minute. This guy's not, who's he? And so I think we all go out there. And so this time what do we most want in life? What's keeping us from doing it? What happens when we touch that Jaguar that change our perception? And then take the actions that are necessary to go forward in doing that. And in the book, as I mentioned earlier, there's a section that gives you it takes less than 10 minutes a day or once a week, whenever you want to do it, to actually go in and look at that about yourself and define the actions you want to take to make your life better and hopefully to help some other people too, because that always makes all of us feel better.
To that last point, can you speak to this issue of kind of the butterfly effect stuff that, this meme that was very popular back 30 years ago. The idea that there are no local actions, that all action, all thought for that matter, has a systemic effect. And therefore we have not only some responsibility in that regard, but also some extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah. Well, every one of us has a lot more power than we realize we have. And when we change ourselves and we impact one other person in our life, and that one other person impacts another and so on, this R factor that's come up during the coronavirus is a good example, that if the R factor is below 1, it means that if you infect somebody else, he's not going to spread it to somebody else. But if the R factor is 3, it means that if you give somebody the coronavirus, you're going to give it to 3 other people if you have it, and each one of those is going to give it to 3 other people. It's exponential. But that's true with ideas. It's true with good deeds. And so we have this amazing ability, all of us, to have a big impact on people. It's a proven fact that if you go into work in an atmosphere of work and you're smiling and you're happy and you make other people feel good, everybody feels better. If you go in bad mood, that has an impact too. And so I think it's really important for each one of us to recognize that we all have a lot more power than we realize we have. And stuff spreads. And so when we start spreading the idea that the perception molds reality, and we've had a false perception of what it means to be successful. It's this idea of maximization of short-term material success that's not making us happy. It's not taking us to a good world. And all we got to do is change that perception and spread that around. That it's about maximizing long-term benefits. Right. And Tom, if you look at the 250,000 years or so that we've been humans on this planet, as we know ourselves to be humans, almost all that time we lived in life economies. We had economic systems, social systems that were themselves renewable. We looked at the long term as in the famous 7th generation idea. Mm-hmm. And it's only been with the last blink of an eye, really, that we've moved toward this selfish, greedy idea of let's accumulate more. More what, Yeah. And it's time that we and incidentally, this system that we've created has worked miracles. We've got amazing technology. The fact that we can talk like this, and we've overcome the echo, I think, too. Yes. The fact that we can talk like this, we've created amazing medicine and technology and science and art, but it's reached its limit. And everything is telling us it's reached its limits. It's really time to listen and to change. And human beings have changed throughout history periodically.
Agreed. Karen has collected a couple of questions. Karen, did you want to jump in and ask these, or shall I?
I'd be happy to.
Go for it.
Okay. You spoke about a change in consciousness among 192 major corporations. Are these concepts currently accepted and being taught in business programs, in colleges, and postgraduate programs?
Well, yes. So 192 executives of these major corporations, they come together periodically in something called the Business Roundtable, and they came out with this statement. You can find it easily by Googling it, the Business Roundtable. Colleges and universities are moving in that direction. I think most all of them are moving in that direction. Some have moved a lot faster than others, but it is happening. It has been happening. And here's an example. So when Confessions of an Economic Hitman came out in late 2004, for the next couple of years, I was on a constant road trip, speaking everywhere. And a lot of it was at MBA programs and law schools and universities. And I would ask to get together with a bunch of students before I gave a talk at a reception or whatever. And I would ask them, so please go around the room and please tell me, what are your goals? And I make it short, but tell me your goals. And I would hear over and over and over, I want to make money and have power. And sometimes I would say, well, what kind of job do you want? What kind of company? Well, basically, I want to work for a company that gives me the opportunity to rise up fast, have more power, more money. And these, I haven't been going to universities very much in the last couple of months, but up until the pandemic, I don't hear that anymore. Not very much. And students today say, I want to have more time to spend with my family. I'm getting a law degree or I'm getting a business degree because I want to create a better world. I hear that a lot. So it is changing. And I have great hope that we are changing. And at the same time, there's still that status quo. There are a lot of professors, there's a lot of deans, there's a lot of college administrations that have resisted. And partly they're resisting because the big corporations want them to resist, and they fund a lot of the programs. So there's a revolution going on here, and it's typical of all times where we go through this revolution. But like a good martial artist, when there's a setback, when there's a pushback by the status quo, a good martial artist knows this. The guy's a lot bigger and stronger than you. Don't try to use your strength to overcome him. Turn his energy back against him and take energy from that. And so I think we should all take energy when there is this pushback, whether it be from a president or whoever it's from, that we take that energy and we understand that that's coming at us because they're afraid. We know that we're headed in the right direction. And yes, we are making progress.
Well, I'm sorry, go right ahead, Tom.
No, I just said, Karen, you have another question.
About your changing the dream of the world conversation. When and how did that begin? And what have been its accomplishments to date?
I'm not quite sure which conversation the question's about.
Talked about changing the dream of the world.
Changing the dream of the world. Well, so the indigenous people understood around in the late 80s is when they called me to a meeting in the Jaguar, way deep in the Amazon. The Jaguar, when I lived with the Shuar, their neighbors in the late 60s, early 70s, the Jaguar were uncontacted officially. They became officially contacted in the mid 70s, and then I started visiting them. And in the 80s, they came to me and they asked me to sit in this council meeting where one elder after another got up and pleaded with me. He said, we know that we've got to touch the Jaguar, and you're the Jaguar. Your people are the Jaguar. You are what we fear. It's your perception, your dream, your perception of the world that's destroying it. That's why the oil companies are here. That's why the mining companies are here. And so you've got to redream. Please join forces with us, and we will help you. Together, we will come together to try to change the dream of the modern world to basically, he was saying, he didn't use these words, but from a death economy to a life economy. And they have, and they've been traveling around the world. They've got representatives of the Jaguar now who are in contact in the mid 70s. A number of them speak Spanish, and quite a few, and some speak English. And they travel to the United Nations. They travel to the World Health Organization. They travel to Geneva. They travel around talking about this, and they've trained a lot of us. And the Pachamama Alliance, which is a nonprofit that came out of all of that, Bill and Lynn Twist and I founded, we're in close to 90 countries now with programs called the Awakening the Dreamer program, the Changing the Dream program, and so on and so forth. So it's been building, but I would say that, the real strong push here was in the late 80s when we were beginning to really understand that.
Well, thank you both so much. Great conversation between you. Much appreciated tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank everybody for participating. And I guess I would like to leave one last message here. Maybe Tom has one too, and that is that I think everybody listening to this should feel blessed to be alive at this time. And despite all the challenges and the problems, we are at a pivotal time in history. And I write in the book about the many indigenous prophecies, the eagle and the condor, the Mayan prophecy of 2012, the Himalayan prophecy, so many prophecies that have come together, and they all say that we've entered a time when there's a portal to change, to rise to higher consciousness. And we're alive at this time. And all of us are in this together, and we're living at a magnificent time of tremendous opportunity to really change the way human beings relate to this magnificent space station that we live on, this living planet, if you want to call it that. We're at an incredible time, and enjoy it, and do what brings you the greatest joy. What can bring you the greatest satisfaction? How do you move forward into that? Move forward into it. We're so blessed to be alive at this time.
Wonderful. Well, on that happy, positive, upbeat note, I want to thank both John and Tom for being with us tonight, and thank everyone for watching from everywhere. Books and Books has many other virtual events coming up, so please follow the bookstore on social media, sign up for their email blasts, and don't miss out. Good night, everyone, and thank you again. Stay healthy. I hope to see you at Books and Books. Good night.
Good night.